Good morning, good evening, good night, NBN, Entrepreneurship and Leadership.
Personally, I'm fascinated by the story.
Trust is an underrated weapon in the business landscape.
I'm a really, really strong believer in learning by doing.
What's the definition of success?
I'm trying to come up with an answer to the question. But go ahead, Richard.
You could be right, but you're wrong. Good morning, good evening, good night, whatever time of the day or night it is. Entrepreneurship and Leadership channel listeners on the NBN. Today we've got Bryan Amaral with us, I believe from the United States, and I'm together with my co-host Keeman. Bryan, why don't you, rather than me try to introduce you on a mangled version of your LinkedIn profile, why don't you do us the honors in the way you would to someone who amazingly had never heard of you yet?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much. I'm very excited to be joining your podcast today, and I'm sure this is going to be a lot of fun. I am essentially today a retail technologist working with retailers around customer-centric transformation. I'm working with tech companies that are trying to bring the right products or services to the retail market in order to kind of facilitate that transformation. And I work a fair bit with private equity and venture that are really investing in this space. So I get a chance after to touch all of that. But my background is I started out in retail very early in life. And then move from that into building solutions in around the retail industry, specifically around customer-centric engagement. So that's today I run a company called Clientricity that really is boutique consultancy.
Okay, and when you say very early in life, I've got images of like preschool sweet retailing or something like that. How early is early in your?
Well,
maybe that's late for you.
Yeah, so actually, so I grew up in a retail family. So I will tell you that I was being given a quarter a day to work in my father's hardware and lumber yards as a child. So, I mean, I had no choice but to kind of find this industry at some point. But I actually started my first retail business and started applying technology to that in the early 80s when I was in college. And basically took one of my courses. I'd started the custom clothing menswear business, I guess in 1982, initially just selling out of my car, eventually opening up showrooms around the country and doing that, and started developing technology. I always loved technology. I thought I was going to be an engineer, right? I ended up hiring them instead. But it's kind of how these things happen. Yeah. But decided to go the business route and started leveraging kind of early technology to really enhance my retail business. And I actually started.
All right, I gotta ask. So we're in it's 82. I like when you're like 20 years old or something like, or you're whatever. You're in college. You're college age. And you're like, and it's like, what is this business? Like you have a car and you bought, I guess, wholesale. You bought. Yeah. Something, and then you're selling to somebody else. And now I'm trying to imagine where does tech come into this? But like,
all right. So let me give you more detail on it. All right. So here I am. I had worked part-time in the menswear, but I took a few years before I started college. So I was involved in some athletics, and while I was doing that, I was basically working in some menswear stores and fell in love with the retail industry. And started college, and I decided that I really needed to make a living while I was in school. So I said, okay, what I'm going to do is start selling custom clothing to, what I used to call the carriage trade, to the affluent customers in the Philadelphia area, which is where I was going to school, and would literally go into their homes and offices and sell them custom made suits.
Nice. So door to door, first of all, because
door to door selling custom clothing. Yeah. I mean, kind of, it was, it's called dialing for dollars, right? You're on the phone all day trying to get a couple of appointments. And then in between classes, you're out selling somebody some custom made suits and shirts, and met some wonderful people.
Custom made suits and shirts so you're actually going, not only are you calling them, are you measuring them? Are you actually going
measuring, designing, measuring? Yeah, I was a tailor. I mean, I was basically, a custom clothier more than a tailor. I tend to think of a tailor as a guy that's how to thread a needle. And I didn't have the real, hands-on skills of manufacturing a garment, but we used shops that could do that for us. And so, I'd go in and, we do a wardrobe consultation, actually get certified, if you can believe this, as an image consultant very early on in my career.
Sorry, I'm not
back in the Dress for Success days, right? But the world's changed a lot since then. But the net on all of it was that I would go in and help these illustrious executives in the Philadelphia, the New York market, and I'd say, okay, we need to make you look taller, thinner, stronger. We're going to cut it this way. We're going to drop the button placement here. We're going to, give you lots of linear pinstripes and, make 5'4" look like 6'2". Do what you could.
Yeah, that's so funny.
Yeah.
That's so good. And
Yeah.
so
So
so I'm just trying to imagine this. Did you have to print out catalog? Because I guess part of it is like, I mean, you can tell people how wonderful they're going to look, but like, are you also like, did you print out, or maybe you had from the wholesalers some like, did you have some like visual aids for this or catalog?
Well, yeah, very little.
Like,
I'll be very candid. So I walked in with about, I mean, I had access to, I remember at the time, 12,000 fabrics, right? So I had all these vendors that I could get. See, little tiny swatches, right? Lots of little tiny swatches. And I had 3 different manufacturers that made suits and a couple of them that made my shirts. And I could order from catalogs, footwear, belts, accessories, that kind of thing, right? And this is before I had a showroom. So, I mean, it really was all in my trunk. It had to fit in the trunk of my car. Okay. So in the very earliest days, we'd go in and you could describe the models. You had drawings of what the garment models looked like. But the truth was with menswear, you were either cutting something that was unwanted and more of a very traditional kind of thing, the sack suit from Brooks Brothers, or in those days, it was really the beginning of very fashion forward sorts of, Armani was very hot at the time and all the rest of that. So you kind of had those silhouettes. And so what I would do is go through a wardrobe consultation. If the guy was a marketing guy, I wasn't putting him in all likelihood in a real traditional sacky suit and making him look like a banker. And that was really kind of the types of things that we thought through. So we try to pick the right model. And then it was storytelling, truthfully, and it was drawing out the distinctions of how I'm going to make it, how I'm going to do these things. So and you got to know your clients really well in that storytelling process, and you really kind of it almost became psychotherapy, to be very honest with you, with some of these guys.
I believe it.
Like,
you probably got to know a lot more than you needed to know.
In many cases, I have things their wives never wanted to know. But anyhow, no, they were an interesting. I mean, it was some of the most fun things I ever did. And I was a guy in my 20s. I mean, I was, a young man, kind of interacting with these people, and then started hiring people, and became very clear I couldn't manage the business and all the details with the business internally. So I had loved technology. So let me kind of move that forward a little bit. So I had really always had a love for technology, thought I was going to be an engineer, and kind of changed direction after I finished some athletics and moved on into full-time school. And I said, well, let me go ahead and write a software program. And this is the very beginning of the IBM XT. I mean, we're going way back here. And I said, let me go ahead and write a software program that keeps track of all my customer information, preferences, lifestyle, all of the stuff I need to know about them there. Today, we call that clienteling. Back then, there really wasn't even a name for it. Right. And then let me go ahead and create a point of sale system that takes into account all of the variables of which vendor I'm using and oversized charges and how much fabric and the style details and with a vest, without a vest, and all of those details. And then let me print out an order form. So that was the very first
way. An ERP system for your.
Yeah, it was kind of it was CRM, POS. It did a little bit of ERP back end, and and there was no internet, right? I mean, this is the early days, right? There was no internet, so I had these remote players. The very first HP 110 laptop. I'll never forget this little device. I thought it was it was like, I don't know, 15 lines of screen on it, right? Like a little tiny laptop kind of came out. I'm like, I can give that to my salespeople and get them out on the field and have them in front of a customer placing their orders remotely. And we created a store and forward hub system, which was, the beginning of kind of internet technology, TCP/IP sorts of stuff. And we started receiving remote orders. So I had direct sellers in Boston, New Jersey, Los Angeles, and we're taking in orders.
Sorry, in between this, you also, this is like what we're really interested in, is how you grew this business. So you went from the door to door, like doing it by yourself, and then you started hiring people. You also mentioned a showroom. So like, I'm trying to get this part into it as well. So you actually had people, at some point you had like physical locations where people.
Yeah. So Philadelphia, I eventually, things were going, pretty well. We were really kind of driving the business, and I went and I bought a building out on the main line of Philadelphia.
Oh, wow.
How
old were you when you bought this building in Philadelphia?
Say 24, 25, something like that. I don't know, 26 maybe. I don't know. I have to go back and look at it.
So listeners, this is the American dream, right?
Yeah, well. Yeah, it was an interesting time, and I basically gutted the building and filled it with about as much mahogany I was legally allowed to bring into the country, and created this very elegant gentleman's club kind of atmosphere. So at that point, we started to, we still were doing some direct selling, in the Philadelphia market, as well as the showroom, and then in other markets as well. But with the showroom, we could bring people into the showroom, sit them down in front of the fireplace, give them a glass of brandy, cognac, whatever, a good single malt, a cigar if they wanted one. They couldn't smoke too many of them because it would mess up the clothes. And basically go through this process of understanding how to fit their head. And then at the backside of that, ultimately start to show them that this is how I'm going to design your wardrobe. And we would just lay it all out. This is how we're going to build your wardrobe to where you want to go. And then we would.
So this was like more, this wasn't like I'm buying a suit. This wasn't like I'm just showing up. I don't get the single malt and the cigar to buy a suit. It was like, I'm giving you all my, like, you taking over my fashion, you're taking over my wardrobe.
No, basically we were, once they started working with us, they weren't likely going to anybody else. And
share of wallet. So you're getting a big share of the clothing wallet of your individual.
Maybe, generally. And when I think about it in today's dollars, what those suits cost back in the day, I still sometimes kind of go like, wow, I must have been really good at this, because those are pretty expensive suits, but anyhow.
Bryan, can we dial back a bit? Because I'm really interested in like the early stages. Like, obviously you already mentioned your parents were retailers, so you grew up in a retail environment. Was it clear to you that like setting up your own business was a choice that you had, or was it, you said you want to work through college, but a lot of people go and work for Starbucks or the equivalent of. Was entrepreneurship so much there in your childhood that it was always out there?
Here's what's really funny. When I was a child, I remember telling my parents, I will never go into this kind of business. I will never work in retail. I don't understand why you have wasted your life in something like this. I wanted nothing. I said, I'm going to be an engineer. I'm going to build, robots. I'm going to build, I had a workshop in my basement where I was building shortwave radios and analog computers in my basement. I was this geeky kid in the basement. And when I wasn't doing the other things I was doing, I was in my basement, thinking I was going to be an engineer. And then enough years between high school and college, happened that I decided I don't want to be an engineer. I really want to build a business. So that's kind of where that all happened. You kind of get bitten by, and when you get into retail, and this is the thing that if you ever talk to any career retail people, they'll tell you the same thing. And that is, it doesn't take long being inside of retail and you never leave. I mean, it just becomes part of you. The industry is just a very exciting, dynamic industry in so many ways. So, I got into it, but I didn't think I was going to when I was quite young. And then once I started my first menswear business, I knew I would always in some way be involved in the retail.
Okay, so it was like a one-way switch. It's like, you switch to the Mac and you never go back to the sale. So, and can you just describe your first sale? You had this idea, but was it like, there must have been a moment when do you remember your first ever customer, like when you were knocking on doors?
Yeah, I do. And I remember I knew nothing about direct selling. Okay. And I remember buying a set of cassette tapes and I'm trying to think of the guy's name, but anyhow, a set of cassette tapes on how to basically pitch. Right. And I'd kind of, lined up this whole sales presentation, the 3 reasons you want to do business with me and the whole bit. And I kind of set this whole thing up and I walked in and the guy looked at me and goes, okay, I'll buy 4 shirts from you. And I remember just being in absolute shock that I'd actually closed a sale at that point. And here was some big senior executive that was he was actually a gentleman with the electric company. Actually, he was a very senior guy with the electric company in Philadelphia. And I was like, wow. And then I started getting pulled into some of the insurance guys, and they were great at referring because they were direct sellers and they understood the problems with that. And before you knew it, I started to have like a really nice complement of customers, and off it went. But I remember those first days. My God, I was terrified. I didn't know how to navigate a high-rise office building. I mean, I was that naive, right? I mean,
you get lost.
I would sit there parking, and I'm like, and I didn't know if I had enough money to get out of parking. I was like, if I don't, is the guy going to pay me cash? I don't know quite how this is going to work.
Amazing.
That's so funny.
Amazing.
You didn't know if you were going to get out of the parking. So, and then anyway, so you got this, so I'm curious now how you got from, so you have this big salon or what in Philadelphia, and then what happens next? You're going to set up more salons, or because you start sending these people out with this remote thing. Obviously, it's hard to go too remote if your thing is in Philadelphia, right? So what happened next?
So what I did is, so I had a few people out selling, and the plan was to basically apply technology to the whole process. I ironically just found it the other day. I actually have a flow chart of how I was going to grow the business. And it literally was applying technology to all these different functional areas of the business. And this is, we're talking IBM XTs. We're talking mostly mainframe computing out there. I mean, this is the very beginning of automating business processes in retail, or in any industry for that matter. But I had this vision for what it was going to be. And I thought, okay, I can build a technology-enabled custom clothing empire, right? That was kind of a thing, kind of showrooms in all of the key major cities.
If only you'd met Jeff Bezos, right?
Right. It was a little early, Hey, by the way, so I don't forget to say this. I have learned in my life that being early feels a lot like being wrong, So, so it's really hard when you're early at something,
right.
And I've been early on a bunch of stuff in my life, So anyhow, make a long story short, I started growing this, and I had this vision to really replicate this model. 1988 rolled around, which was, really, I think it was 88. It was the economic downturn, right? Yeah. Really, really bad time. And a lot of my clients were having, struggles. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to grow this. I built this software for myself. It was pretty nascent technology, but I built this technology. I'm like, I'm going to law school. I mean, what am I going to do this for? This is just really hard, building out this retail business. I'll just go to law school. But I had gotten really used to driving a nice car, eating in restaurants, traveling around a lot. I was, flying out to the West Coast on a regular basis for the people I had working out there. I was like, okay, I'm going to have to make some money while I go to school. So maybe I can sell this technology that I developed. So I knew somebody who was a programmer, and I said, hey, come on in to take a look at what I've got so far. And he said, oh yeah, we can build this into a saleable product. He said, maybe you could sell some of this while you're going to school, back to school. And I'm like, okay, that's an idea. Of course, I fell in love with building software. And that was kind of the end of it. Within 2 years, I'd sold the clothing business and gotten rid of that. And I was completely focused. This was 1990, I guess, at this point, and launched my first technology company, which was Menswear Technologies. And
so you've taken the core technology, and now obviously you've repurposed it for general retail. I mean, you basically, like a lot of retail has the same problems. And so so how can you just talk a little bit about?
Yeah. So at the time, okay. So at the time, there were about 200 or 300 small boutique businesses that I had identified nationally that could use the solutions that I was using for my own business. Okay. Right. So there were a bunch of these smaller little boutiques that did enough custom. They had enough need for this kind of customer engagement, clienteling sorts of workflows that our software supported, that I was like, okay, I can, if I productize this, I can bring this to market and go to the major, a couple of trade shows that we had in the industry and sell it to the guys that I've met over the years in the industry and make a living out of it. And so that's really kind of where we started. And I had one of my clients, so the first question that anybody that's an entrepreneur sitting on the other side here is going, okay, you're going to build software. So who's paying for it, right? You've just kind of out of an economic downturn. How are you going to pay? Right. You've got a building that you're paying for, how are you going to pay for this? Right. Yeah. So I had one of my investors, wonderful gentleman, but before he was an investor, he was a customer, and he walked in one day and I was telling him about my vision for the stuff. And he said, well, I've got some money. He said, let's go to dinner. So we sat down and we talked about the vision for the business, and he was my first angel investor to kind of get this thing off of the ground. And he turned out to be, he was with me for the first wave of my technology career. And it was really, pretty exciting to have somebody that believed in me the way he did. And he was just a really wonderful human being.
I've got a question about your finances. Obviously, don't share anything you don't want to share, but can you give a sense of what scale you were at when you took the decision for law school, and had you made some serious money? It sounds like you were doing pretty well, but on the other hand,
Yeah,
you were quitting in a downturn. So, can you? I mean, don't again. We don't want you to share stuff you're awkward with, but on the other hand, you obviously needed an angel investor. I was thinking you might have been a multimillionaire by the time you went to
No, it wasn't. No, it's and the truth is, direct selling businesses are, we didn't scale really large. I mean, it was so. I think we were for a small boutique retail business, we were doing very well. I would say that an average salesperson was probably doing about half as much business as an entire store would in a neighborhood. So they were selling several customers a week, 6-7 customers a week, kind of thing. But an average transaction, even back then, could easily be 700 to thousands of dollars, so that was kind of what those customers were doing. So, I don't want to necessarily, give numbers, but I wasn't, let's put it this way. I hadn't killed it yet, but I was doing well, and I had a business there, but we had invested a lot back into the business, and my goal really was to build this larger enterprise. So I was like, okay, let's move forward with this next thing. But the law school seemed safe. And, let's all be honest, you're in your 20s, you're still trying to figure out who the heck you are and what you're going to do next.
It's crazy that you did all that stuff in your 20s. Actually, to be honest with you, it's like I'm blown away that you did all that stuff in your 20s. It sounds like already a lifetime worth of stuff, and you're still only in your 20s.
Yeah. My first ulcer happened right now, but anyhow, so anyhow, the business was a nice business, but we did need to bring in capital to grow it, to grow the software side of it. So started a company called Menswear. He became a partner in Menswear, and we went out and we built this first product. And I sold probably somewhere in the area of around 150 independents, maybe even closer to 200 independent, smaller retailers. And back then, nobody knew anything about technology. So when you were selling the PC, the printer, the software, updates, doing training, it was a package, and you were, kind of selling it that way. So kind of got really going with that and loved it, and then eventually started.
This was obviously way before subscription-based anything. So one sale. And then how do you get your repeat? Your repeat was like based on updates that
right. So you had a monthly subscription. So what we were doing, if you could imagine, when you're working with we were working with virtually all of the made to measure part of the business. That's really where we started. That this made to measure custom clothing business. We were working with almost all of the back end vendors. We actually had it set up so that we could send orders now into the factories directly.
Oh, wow. That's useful.
But we were working with all of them. We had to keep on top of what were their fabric availabilities, all of those kinds of things. And so we were sending, floppies got a little smaller. We were sending floppy disks every week to our clients, and they were installing it and doing data updates, doing the updates themselves, because it really, people don't realize how much the internet made life easier.
Yeah.
There was no such thing as an API back then,
Right.
So anyhow, but that was kind of how we were keeping that business rolling. And we had the recurring, but we had a lot of customers to go after, and it was a nice business. And then I started to say, well, wait a minute, if I really want to make this work, what pieces of this really apply to the larger retail enterprises?
Right.
And it was really that whole front end clienteling, customer engagement, customer preference tied back into CRM. It was that kind of that part of the offering that really had the most resonance. So I started to go out after some larger retailers. So, the first few that we did work with, we're doing a little custom, but we're more interested in some of the other pieces of it. So we went with Alfred Dunhill. I did some stuff with Saks Fifth Avenue's a personal shopping program. Then we started to do some of their other brands that were doing made to measure, as well as.
But this is all you're still using your homemade whatever.
Yeah, this is the early 90s, right? This is rebuilt, right? Keep in mind, in 1990, we started this company and we rebuilt some software, and now we had a product that we were actually bringing to market under the Menswear Technologies name. So that was kind of where I was going with that.
But was it sort of modular in the sense that you could actually give them that the piece that they like Saks doesn't need, I'm sure doesn't need your back end of the vendors and all that, but they were probably interested in the front end. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah. Well, it was interesting. So the personal shopping business used the front end. They had, at the time, Alan Flusser had a men's custom clothing department inside of Saks in New York. And so we were actually doing the custom stuff just in that one department, so it was that kind of a thing. But we priced it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh, you
so
were
we
customizing
modularized it.
You were customizing it. Also, you were customizing
Oh
it
yeah,
to solve customers.
absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. And I had a small team of developers, and I was still living in Philadelphia at that point in time. Well, at least until '92. But as I continued to evolve the product, it became pretty clear to me that I really needed a better team, and I was taking a look at kind of where I really wanted to build the business, and so I moved down to Atlanta to partner with a company that was a UK based software company that did a lot in retail, that also had an outpost here, and we started developing more and more of the technology, kind of using their teams, outsourcing as much of the development as I could, candidly. Small internal team, larger team that I was depending upon to build the rest of it out. And there was a lot of retail technology here in Atlanta, so I said, okay, I'm going to move to Atlanta and basically build up my software company in Atlanta. So that's really what brought me here, and that was, I think, '92 is when I shuttled between the two places for a while, and eventually got rid of the place in Philadelphia and just lived here in Atlanta, and that kind of got me building my real enterprise software companies. So we did work with a few larger retailers in the early days, Hudson's Bay Company in Canada, a few of those players, and that continued to grow. So I had smaller players, bigger players trying to keep the thing, but we were still, candidly, back to this idea of being early, being wrong. It was still hard. I mean, this was not like everybody was beating a path to your door. I mean, you were out there, hustling in order to sell.
And how were they solving the problem? Like, I'm just even trying to imagine, because I remember back then, but actually I was still relatively, I was still young in the sense that I didn't know about business enough then, but like, how were they doing it? Like, without the software, like, what was the process? Like,
well, it was manual.
Exactly. It was papers, right? It was paper.
It was paper, paper and fax machines, folks.
Exactly.
This is, for those of you that are younger, fax machines take paper and turn it into something digital on the other end, Yeah. No, it was, it was manual. These were manual systems, in the customer engagement stuff, people were using manual client books, right? It was, a little black book, and
so
they were.
It must have been. I don't want to say nothing is an easy sale, but like, you were really solving. Like, you were really making. I'm sure you had a lot of, like, you had a very strong business case for your software, I think, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So from that perspective, so what was the challenge?
Well, clients aren't smart. If you've got a successful retail, you should never say this, but
that's a good point.
You've got these people who are perhaps quite wealthy, they're doing fine, and it's not their problem that their poor guys who work in their department are doing all these manual processes. New stuff doesn't work. I'm just imagining how maybe we'll come on to it. I've done a lot of business in particularly barcode technologies, so I'm quite familiar with how hard it is to persuade someone to place a person. They can save themselves a fortune. They just don't care.
Yeah, they just, it isn't, it really has been, finally today, and we're a long way. There's so much has happened from those early days to today, right? But for today, finally, retailers realize that a very important part of their overall business strategy has to be technology. They have to deploy technology, in many respects, like Amazon really is a technology company, right? But so much of retail today has a foundation that really is digital. And so today we're finally, I used to say in the old days, when times were good, retailers didn't think they needed to invest in technology. And when times were bad, they couldn't afford it. Right. So, so you were in this challenge of trying to get budget, right? So they would do small pilots, but moving from pilot, and they'd go, yeah, it's great, getting great results, but we're going to focus over here and open a new store. And it was that kind of a thing that you were always wrestling with. But again, I had a vision for it. I knew it was coming. I could see it. The vision for me was completely clear. So anyhow, we grew, Imageware Technologies, and then somewhere about 10 years later, I was out looking for capital, and we had, done work with Brooks Brothers. A lot of smaller ones, but some big names as well. And we said that we came across a company called Symbol Technologies, which was doing mobile handheld scanning. If you were in Barcode, you know all about Symbol back in the early days. They were the first people to do really kind of enterprise class mobility, mobile devices. And they had a vision that aligned with my vision, which was what they called portable and escorted shopping. It was basically clienteling on a handheld for sales associates inside of a store environment, and being able to engage customers before, during, and after the sale with mobile devices in various sorts of ways. So, think deep customer information, think selling tools for the sales associates for outreach and communication, think product knowledge, product recommendation, upsell, cross-sell, and then on the back end, other kinds of workflows that happen in the retail environment. So our solution set had gotten very, very focused around those kinds of value propositions, clienteling value propositions for retailers. And Symbol really liked what we were doing, and they said, okay, well, we're going to go ahead and acquire you instead of help you raise capital. We're just going to acquire you. You're going to run a division inside of Symbol. You'll be the software group on top of our hardware. So I had an opportunity to work for Fortune 500 for a couple of years there, running that division for them, and we brought on more customers.
Was it hard to take the decision to sell your company?
It was very difficult, but I was very happy, truthfully, that I was able to monetize it, particularly for the original investor that I referenced. That
Exactly.
Believed in me from the beginning. This was a guy that, we went for bagels and coffee every morning, down the street. He was just a wonderful man, truly one of the most wonderful people that ever came into my life. And, to be able to monetize it and all of that was great. And, and it was a very different experience. It's the only 2 years of my life that I've ever worked in a corporate environment that wasn't of my making, I guess would be the best way to put that, right? And I remember being on the beach in the south of France with my wife and new baby, and looking at her and going, I don't have to worry about a payroll. Somebody else is going to take care of it. I actually get a vacation. This is very different. But 2 years into it, Symbol had gone through some big issues. It was a big transformation in the company. There were some things that, let's just call them some accounting irregularities that literally changed the entire management team of the company. And it was pretty well known at the time. And ultimately led to them being acquired by Motorola. So just before they got acquired by Motorola, they came to me and they said, hey, listen, we're really not going to keep this division moving forward. What do you want to do? And I'm like, what?
What are the options?
What are my options? Like, well, you could buy back the software, if you want to do that. I'm like, but I get all this big exit stuff coming right now. It's like, there's still an earn out on this thing. Like, what are we doing here? It wasn't one of those moments that I was really thrilled with at all. I was very unhappy about the fact, but there were changes. The company was a new management team. It's a new strategic direction.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So I, it was kind of like being adopted by a dysfunctional family is the way I used to joke about it. It's like, oh, okay, this is where I am now. All right, now what do I do? Again, you kind of sit at the end of your bed that next morning and you go, what do you want to do? How am I going to continue to move forward? I've spent my whole life building this product, really kind of being the early guy in this space. What am I going to do with it?
And you're about 40 years old at this stage, I guess.
I was right around that. Yeah. I was probably at that time 42, I'm going to guess. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyhow, I was like, okay, well, it's what I do. So I'm going to go out and raise money, and I'm going to go buy the company back, and I'm going to spin it off and relaunch it as a new company. And I had about 6 months to do it. Because they had to be finished by the end of their calendar year, because they, of course, had other things coming down the pike that they had to get done. So it had to be done by the end of the calendar. So I went out and found some investors in New York. And by the way, back then, unlike the last few years here, investing in retail technology, people would look at you and go,
what?
You want to do what? Retailers don't spend any money on technology. I mean, we'll never see our money come back out of this. This is never going to happen. And I'm like, no, you got to see the vision here. This is where it's going. So anyhow, I did finally find an investment group that did some work with us. And
sorry, can I just ask about the detail? And again, I'm just curious. I'm just trying to imagine how it works. If somebody buys your company, I've personally bought a bunch of companies. If somebody buys your company, and then like it's at some level, it's according to contracts and stuff like that, this isn't your problem that Motorola is buying them. So if they want you to get it out, I assume they're giving you a really good deal to get out of there. I mean, because
they gave me a good deal to buy it back, but more importantly, so here they had an asset. If you kind of think of it from this perspective, they had an asset that they weren't sure what to do with. They knew that they had all of these VARs and this whole ecosystem of partners that could probably use it. I didn't want to see it just be given to the marketplace. I'd spent my life building the IP that was behind this. Right. So I wasn't going to let that happen. So, and I really believe that there was a monetizable event, another monetizable event with this thing in a big
So you were interested. It was like, you were basically, but you did get, I mean, you did get a good deal. I mean, because they paid you money and then you were able to get it out again.
No, I got it back out.
It wasn't like a terrible, because you could have just, I assume they would have to pay you whatever they had to pay. Like if you wanted,
I'm not going to go into the terms of the contract, but let's just say that had I been given another couple of years, it would have been a much better deal for me.
You know
what I'm saying? It was one of those things where it was a couple of years and really wasn't enough time for me to fully execute on the full plan that I wanted to execute on. So, we were just starting to really scale the business, and it would have been nice to have had that happen at a point that it was a little further down the road. Right. But it was what it was. And I was like, okay, well,
you got the investors, and here you are again. You're back in the saddle.
I'm back in the saddle, right? CEO of a company now called Retaligent. So at that point, in it was a really interesting thing because it was the last business day of the year, which was December 30th of that year, and I guess that was December 30th of 2002. And I had to close it before the first of the year. And, the people that have to sign it are like on boats in the Caribbean, right? And I'm trying to get this deal done, and I am sweating bullets, and I've got the investors who are, signed up for this, and this partial transaction that's happening this way and that way. And you've got debt and you get equity. And you're trying to figure it out, and how much of you and how much of them. And it's this very complex thing that I was pulling together. And, we pulled it off at 4:30 in the afternoon on December 30th, right? I mean, on a Friday afternoon before the holiday, right? So I'm like, okay, I now own this company. 7 days or maybe 9 days later, I launched the company at the National Retail Federation show. So in the meantime, I have been building trade show booths, building out my team, positioning this whole thing from a marketing perspective, worked with some really great people to help us kind of from a PR perspective and all the rest of it and there was this moment that was truly one of the proudest moments of my life where I stood there at NRF with literally hundreds of people in front of my booth, no one having ever heard of the company except for some emails that came into them. And they're like, are we going to go see these guys? Who are these guys? They're doing some really cool stuff. And we launched Retaligent. Well, Retaligent was really, was a really exciting business. And, there were all of the pain points that you imagine with capital raising and all of the stuff that goes on. I mean, it was not an easy business by any stretch, but we were able to do work with Saks, Harrods, Armani, Polo, Calvin Klein, Hugo Boss, the Bay in Canada, Grupo Sandro in Mexico.
So I mean, you really got traction now.
We really were getting traction. And the truth was that we were a little less early. Right. The market was kind of coming to us a little bit more. And I built out this extraordinary team, and some of the greatest, memories of my life really were working with the people that I got to work with, with Retaligent. And so we started that. And so that was continued on for quite a while there, as we continued to grow that. Harrods in London was, kind of giving us the European thing. We're starting to look at going into Asia. In the meantime, now we're thinking the next big recession kind of hit through, right? So you get this whole 2008 mess that kind of happens. And, everybody kind of had to hit the brakes. It was ugly. I mean, it was, as a matter of fact, I will tell this story because it's just, everybody can point to a certain moment in their life where it changes. And I was on top of the world. Things were going well. I had now 2 children. I had a little boy who I guess at the time was, around 4 years old. standing there with me, looking them digging our pool in the backyard. And I'm standing on the deck with him, and I'm thinking like all these wonderful things. And my wife calls me in. My wife at the time calls me in and says, there's something really weird going on TV you probably want to know about. And it's essentially the crash, right? And it's like people walking out of office buildings in New York carrying their stuff.
The Lehman Brothers.
The Lehman Brothers, right? And I'm like, and she goes, what does it mean? It means I should go out there and stop them from digging this pool. Is what it means.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I just want to dive in because you talked about amazing people, and you mentioned earlier in your journey, you put together salespeople, and obviously one of the things you managed to do well over the years was to attract some talented people. But have you got any, part of what we want to do with this is education, and you've got a perspective. Is there anything you learned about managing people, attracting people, keeping people, that either what you got wrong and then fixed, or just like whatever you do this, or whatever you do, don't do that?
Yeah, I would say this, that, there are people that I'm sure are far better managers of taking people that are a little bit rougher and converting them into super high performers. What I did is I found people that at their core were extraordinary. I built my teams out of people that really all I had to do was show them the vision, constantly over communicate the vision of where we were going as a company. We used to break the entire business down into functional areas of responsibility. So every area of the business was basically a functional area of responsibility, in that we had very clear goals for what had to happen by when. There were people assigned to those functional areas of responsibility, and all of our reporting was kind of brought back up through that. I even had dashboards that everybody could kind of tie into that was all around that. So we always had a very clear idea of where we were going. But it was really, what I came to realize was it came down to learning to find great people and really being able to, and in the organization. And this was what was really kind of interesting in any of the companies that I've ever been involved with. And I try to carry this on today in my consulting when I'm working with, because I do work with some startups, to show them how to think about it this way. If you build the right culture in your organization, even if you make a bad selection, that person will self-select out. Okay, they won't stay with the organization because they'll see they don't fit. So once you build the right culture, it's almost, your employees kind of maintain that culture and drive it forward. And so when you find the right people hit the ground running, you get extraordinary performance out of them. So to me, so much of the way I built my companies was really around kind of clear vision, communication, really building a great culture, empowering people. And anybody that came into my organization knew that I wanted the company to be a vehicle for them to live out their potential. So it was not uncommon for me to take somebody, let's say an administrator for me, to basically send them back to school to become an analyst, to have them ultimately become project manager or analyst, in the organization. I had another one that wanted to do marketing, so kind of found a really bright person in that role, and then allowed her to kind of go into more of a marketing role, got her the education she needed while she was working with us. And she's had an extraordinary career in the marketing field, even beyond that. So, but I loved using the organization as a vehicle for people to kind of live out their potential and to really explore new things and all the rest of that. And fast track companies, you can do that because you always have more to do than you have people to do it. So people have an opportunity to kind of gravitate to those things they really want to do.
And so you're back. So 2008 hits. You're looking at the swimming pool with your son, and you're like, "Oh crap!" And then what?
Yeah, then what? So we learned to double down in how to do more with less. I ended up recapitalizing the company through the downturn, and went into a partnership with Microsoft, where we actually developed a product for Microsoft on the Dynamics platform.
No way.
Which was very exciting. And so we basically created an end-to-end retail engagement platform. So the front end was all this clientele and customer engagement stuff. The back end was really slice it, dice it, analyze it, campaign management, early social discovery, all of that stuff on the back end of it. And it was this complete platform that you could bring to retail. We put together a partnership with Microsoft to get it to on a global basis, where they literally, the sales organization, they had about 300 salespeople globally running enterprise accounts that basically had a number on their head to bring this thing to market. And we launched that at NRF in 2010.
And NRF is that retail? That's just
that's the National Retail Federation trade show. It's the biggest event of the year. So when I say we launched it there, I mean the gentleman that ran all business solutions for Microsoft stood on the stage at Microsoft in front of 5,000 retailers and basically, announced and showed a video of how this all works and how.
Was that a partnership, or that was just pure dynamics? Like you were just subcontracting that, and that
no, we built a very close partnership with Microsoft at that point.
Okay, so you were getting potential revenue stream out of that.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So no, it was we were really we had worked it out with them, and it was a really, I'd spent a long time building an ecosystem of partners, and I've always found that to be an extraordinarily important part of building technology companies, is that you need to be grabbing a tiger by the tail. Right. And I learned a lot about that, truthfully, inside of my time with Symbol, where I could see that doors opened faster. Right, people were more willing to do business with a larger company than a smaller company. So if you can at least get introduced through a larger company, it really did a lot to accelerate kind of contract closures, for lack of a better way of describing it. So anyhow, we went ahead and launched this product. And when I tell this part of it, you're going to go, "Oh my God, really?" And within 24 hours, we'd brought in, during the downturn, but my board had brought in some other investors. I won't go into a lot of detail about this, but the net of the whole thing was that they decided it was time to monetize the company. So they thought we were going to sell it to Microsoft, and right there at the show, the whole dynamic of the company changed. Within a period of a few months, the company was sold. And wow. And I was like, whoa, okay. I guess this is kind of what happens with outside money, That's kind of how it goes.
That's exactly what happens. That's exactly what happens.
Yeah.
Because they're trying to get their returns. That's exactly
and truthfully, I mean, when everybody had taken a bloodbath, right, in 2008, 2010, all of a sudden you got good stuff happening. It's like, okay, let's go ahead and let's get out the other side of this. So it was sold to another Microsoft partner, and at that point, I took a look at my life and I went, okay, I had some things going on personally, and I was like, I'm going to take a little bit of a change here. And that's really, what I did next, is I stepped back and started the Clientricity consultancy. I said, okay, so what do I really have?
How long is this? This is now, but I mean, look, you have all this experience. It's a total lot. I mean, I'm sure it was a big life-changing event, but it's totally logical at this point. You've done it all, right? I mean, like, you've been there, you've done it. So you're totally set up to be a prime. You're clearly set up to be a consultant. I mean, it's completely natural. But like, where are we now? This is like what year?
So this would be 2011. Yeah, 2011.
Like 10 years ago, more or less.
Yeah, 10, 11 years ago, right? So, net of the whole thing was that I stepped back and I said, okay, well, we've built 150 best practices that we know that it takes to transform the front end of the retail experience. And all the way out through e-commerce, right? We've built out these practices. We understand what that is. That's a set of IP that I've developed that I can basically bring to market in the consulting space. I really understand the M&A side of it. I really understand the go-to-market. I understand how to sell into retail. Well, I can do some consulting over there too. So the point was that there were all these skill sets that I started to recognize that I had developed through all these experiences that I'd had along the way. And I needed a fair bit of flexibility as personal things in my life had changed and I was going to have full responsibility for my kids. I was like, I don't think I'm going to build another empire and get out there and travel 350,000 miles a year all over the world. Right. I really did believe it was a moment for me to really focus on what, the other part of my life that was really important, which was really my two amazing kids. So that's really, in 2011, I started Clientricity. And today we really, as I was saying before, we do three things. We work with retailers and we really help them through this whole visioning process. We start with a vision and we break that vision down into behaviors. Behaviors get broken down into the very specific technology features that are there to support those behaviors. And then we help them either build or buy that. So I've worked with, big companies like Signet where, we did a build versus buy, but I assessed every bit of their store operations, sales, right? And there's some in the UK. And we've broken that whole thing down into a solution technology platform for them. And we basically architected that working with some other partners for them to bring those products forward. And they saw some amazing, transformation. So that's a typical retail project would be something like that. I'm working on one right now that we're hitting every functional area of a very fast track growing regional retailer right now. And we're literally looking at how to prioritize all of the various aspects of transformation that need to happen in their business, from on the back end warehouse to the front end, this customer engagement and their e-commerce and their marketing and their buying and their allocation and assortment and all of these other areas. So I get to work around all of these different parts of the retail business, helping them to think in terms of behavioral transformation, technology transformation, and then who are the vendors or the players that we need to bring together in order to facilitate that. I also work with a fair number of tech companies that are trying to bring products to market, right? So they'll come to me and they'll say, okay, we think this is a sweet spot, and I'll help them with product roadmaps. I'll help them with go-to-market messaging. I'll help them with introductions. I'll help them raise money sometimes. So we do a lot of that kind of work. And then I work with tech investors, people that are looking to invest in this space, and help them really evaluate companies or help them decide whether that's an appropriate platform. So that's really what I've spent, that's really what I've spent the last, let's say, 10 years, kind of doing with Clientricity is building out these practice areas.
How much of this, okay, I just got to preface this, but I'm not an expert at all. I don't know really know. I spent my whole life in B2B, but I imagine technology and data is out there now that when you're doing these things like market research, you're trying, because you're dealing with retail, you're dealing with individuals, like how much of it is like you're taking data from various systems and you're analyzing, because if you're whether it's for a startup or for a big company, like you need to sort of assess the client group and like, what is this client group and is there a market for this? And so like, how do you get that? How do you are you taking, well, I mean, in one case, if it's a client, obviously you can take their data about they have data, but is that what part of what it almost sounds like market research? It sounds like there's market research somehow involved in this, some kind of like analysis of the of who the consumer is and what's the consumer profile. But with technology today, there's also a lot of data. I'm just wondering, or is it just internet based? Because also a lot of this can just be internet based data as well. Now we have so much additional data.
Yeah. Well, it's all everything you said is true, and then a lot more, right? So I don't mean, and I'm not saying that in any diminishing way towards you.
I said it from the beginning. I don't know. I'm trying to imagine.
Yeah, no, I think so the best way to think about it is this: that every retailer today has a certain amount of customer data, a certain amount of transaction data, a certain amount of associate data, right? Like they have inventory data, product data, supply chain data, all of that stuff. Right. All of those things are necessary to think about how you're going to manage and work with that data in various ways in order to really address the customer experience. Because at the end of the day, transactions happen because of a customer experience. Okay, so what we tend to do is come in and we may be looking at some of the analysis and modeling that's happened on their customer data and say, well, based on this, here are the programs that you need to be driving at store level in terms of store level outreach. Here's the way we want to message stuff through the e-commerce channel. Okay, and by the way, you could be doing live streaming, or you could be doing text messaging through back to the stores, because that a lot of what's happening right now, truthfully, is how do we take kind of the knowledge of the enterprise, take down the walls of the store,
right,
allow people to engage with us wherever, whenever they want, and even through the human side of it. So we're kind of humanizing a lot of what was traditional e-commerce. So that's a lot of the types of work that I get to do with retailers today is focused around, kind of this next generation of how you engage with that. But you need this whole platform of data on the backside of it. When I'm doing a complete enterprise platform transformation, which is this project I'm working on right now, which is pretty exciting. And I've got some really great experts. I don't have all the depth of knowledge in every piece of the enterprise, right? So you bring in people to work with you on that.
Right.
But when we look at all of that, the data that's happening at the back of the warehouse, there's a certain amount of visibility that needs to happen at the store level. And at the store level, that data then may have to trigger something, in terms of messaging between managers and associates, or outreach to customers. So all of this stuff, these platforms have to be able to share data in some pretty broad ways. So, today, data is at the center of everything we're doing. I mean, when you really get to it, there has to be an underlying platform. The real question, though, is what are you trying to accomplish? And so often people look at technology from the standpoint of technology out. I don't. And all the projects we do, we start at looking at the problem of what does the ideal customer experience look like? How do people want to touch your brand? What does good look like? And then we start to design from that. And then we say, based on that, how do we drive those behaviors? Because ultimately it has to be a set of behaviors, both from the customer and from the brand. How do we drive those behaviors? What are the technology pieces that need to be behind it? What data is required in order to support that? And how do we replicate this and monitor and manage it in a way that we can actually measure it on an ongoing basis in order to make this transformation of value to the enterprise? So that's kind of the way we look at the problem of transforming retailers.
Got it. And
do you know what I think about when I hear that? I think, Richard, I don't know if you. I think this kid was selling door to door, and now listen to him, like 30 years later or whatever it is. I mean, it's just nuts. It's like just nuts. What a trend! Like what from that to this, it's like incredible. What a journey! I mean, like what a journey.
Totally, Mike, you've actually more or less rephrased my question another way. That just from your body language and your pitch and your tone of voice, it's obvious you're really into this. You know, either you're a brilliant actor and you should have been in Hollywood, or this is. You said you got retail in your blood, but can you just get a sense of where you're taking this? And it's all been around retail, but you've done multiple things. You've had a tech company, now you're consulting, you were actually a practitioner. Where do you see yourself taking this? Because I'm guessing you must be like 50, 55, 60, that sort of...
I'm on the wrong side of 60 now, so to be very candid. So,
and you know, your 4-year-old is presumably 18, or
he is 17. Yeah, he is 17. And he overslept this morning for school. But all of that aside,
can you just
very real problems we deal with in life.
And nothing beats the challenges of parenting in terms of management. But can you just talk through what your future might look like in terms of if it goes the way you'd like it to go? Because there isn't time to consider all the scenarios. But how long will you keep on working?
I think. And obviously it's, I think we're all always looking at kind of, what's the road ahead and what could it be? I will say this, that I've waited a long time for the retail industry to finally get to where it is today. And it took much longer than I would have ever thought, to be very candid with you. But the point today, we're finally looking at how technology can transform retail in some pretty fundamental ways. I do, very much enjoy my consultancy. I will continue to grow the consultancy. I often think, well, do I want to go out there and build, the second kid will be in college soon. Do I want to go out and build a second empire, go out there and build another retail technology company? And there are, there's some great ideas out there that kind of got in the sketchbook, so to speak, that could be done in order to do that. But, my vision, I don't intend to stop working anytime soon. Unfortunately, I wake up where people think I'm already caffeinated. I'm just one of these high energy people. I love to apply that, to the marketplace and to the problems I see in front of me. So I will continue to grow this company. I may very well productize some things a little further down the road. I do get an opportunity to work on so many exciting things. I mean, even what's really kind of ironic is I've gotten involved now in, 3-dimensional body scanning for custom clothing. I mean, things that go all the way back to the beginning. I've done consulting around that, right? I've worked around a lot of things that were very closely related to some of the very original ideas that I had, back in the 80s. And so it's as I said, the industry's taken a long time to get there. I just look for fun things that where I can deliver real value, where I get to work. And here's the thing that happens as you do get older. You want to work with people you like to work with. So when I find people that are really fun, like the clients I'm working with right now, I love these guys. It's just a great culture. And to me, life is too short not to work with people that you really have a common view of what good looks like, just in life in general, right? Where you have good character in the people you're working with. So I try to find, I think really as I look at the next, let's call it 15 years, for me, probably, doing some version of consulting and maybe productizing something a little further down the road, as we kind of look at where things go. And I think the economy is going to determine that for a lot of us, right? We can all have dreams. We'll see what happens. I've been through a few of these.
I was struck by how actually the downturns really were significant sort of milestones in your story. The economic downturns for retail in particular, they hit across the thing.
Yeah.
So we're getting ready to wrap, I think, a little bit. But what I'm really curious. So like you just said something right there that the question I want to ask is, like, if you just had to tell, like, we have some young people listening to this who want to like set up their business or thinking about taking the entrepreneurial journey, is there any one thing in particular? But I really do want to emphasize the thing you just said, because I love that one, which is that, like, choosing the people. Like I can't emphasize enough that the work environment that you choose, having the people around that you share values with, that you can work with, that will just make the experience so much better. I mean, you're saying that as you realize that as you get older. Well, let's tell the younger people.
Tell young people now, right? Well, there were really a couple of there are really two things that I tend to tell. Last evening, I was out with a new startup who's got some really interesting reverse logistic business. And I was sitting here, literally having a cocktail with the guy, and he'd like me to get involved in helping him a little bit and advising him a bit. And he's a young guy with a young family. And so I'll tell you, really, there were two things that I said to him. And I said, one is make sure you're building a team of people that you would choose to work with under any circumstances, right? You get a chance to choose the right people. The culture of your business is the most important thing that you can possibly do. And I think I referenced that a little bit before. It is what creates a great company. You can take 15 people in the right culture and it looks like a 200-person company, to the market, because you've created something extraordinary with the way the culture works and the way that people perform and what they bring to market. So, but you also need to have trust. And I think trust is such an extraordinarily important thing, that everybody knows that we're all carrying the weight. And I mentioned before kind of the way that, how people basically select themselves out of an environment, right? If it doesn't work, you have to build the right kinds of things. So I think that thinking in terms of people and character first, and the second part of that, thinking about people and character first, and this is just something that I tell everybody now that's taking it on, don't work 100 hours a week. If you've got a family, you need to keep your life.
It's not worth it.
It's not worth it. You've got to keep your life in balance, because the truth is, as a CEO, you're spending a lot of time steering around the rocks. You know where you're going. You're pointed in a direction, but you cannot 100% control all the variables that are going to come. You need to make sure that you keep the other part of your life. You can't say, well, I'm going to only do this for 2 years and ignore everything else. And, you have to find a way to find that balance. And I think it's the most difficult thing for people that wake up in the morning trying to breathe life into a dream. They're completely committed to it, but a lot of other things can suffer. And I think that finding work-life balance, be fully committed, be completely focused, be darn good at organizing yourself, build a team, with the right people, and then make sure that you have that other part of your life that's just as important, that you prioritize.
I really agree with that. And I do think, I think there's lots of ways of saying that. I think that one of the major pitfalls, I really believe this with small business owners and people that try to set up their business, and it is sort of the same thing, is what I would call micromanaging. You're talking about, but it comes down to micromanaging in the sense that, but you're saying the same thing. It's, you want to let go. You need to let go. If you're ready to let go and trust, and you said trust as well, if you're ready to let go and trust these great people that you brought on, then you should be able to go home, and you should be able to take a vacation, and you should be able to do stuff. I mean, and that is fundamental. But unfortunately, there's a lot of the culture and social media that, they glorify a lot of stuff that's kind of stupid, actually.
I agree.
I'm with you 100% on that. I mean, you don't want to wake up, many years down the road and say, what the hell did I do? What was I doing? What did I do? What did I gain? And what did I lose? I mean, it's horrible.
I mean, you just have to realize that you're making choices that is still your life. Your life isn't your business. You're building a business, in order to have the life you want. So decide first, what is the life you want?
Exactly.
And how do these pieces fit together? I think is probably the way to
Yeah,
talk.
it would be a great note to end on, but I do notice, I do notice you've got a podcast, and as you know, MBN's part of one of the largest author interview podcasts in the world, and I think that some of our listeners might be potential listeners to your podcast. So who should listen to you? Can you just talk for like a minute on what your podcast is and who should listen to it? This is an opportunity for a free ad because you've given us an hour of your time. You know?
So here's, I have to be a little bit apologetic about my podcast. So I was really putting a lot of energy into the podcast before COVID. And as a matter of fact, I had 8 programs in the can ready to go when COVID hit, on top of what was already published. All of which were completely irrelevant when the stores all closed. And without sharing too much, I had actually moved my whole family to New York for projects I was working on in New York, a few months before COVID hit. So I'm also that guy, goodness. Right? And I'm like, okay. So I came back and I have not really gone as deep back into it. We actually are planning now to go ahead and start to I've actually been in the last couple of weeks talking to people now about bringing on new guests and starting some more stuff. The podcasts we have right now are really, and they're certainly high quality podcasts that are out there, are worth listening to because they're really about how organizations have really had to think about implementing the kind of change, the people change that has to happen around customer-centric engagement. Even with the tools, how does that happen? So I've brought on some clients and some people that have really done this kind of thing and interviewed them on these podcasts to help people understand how do you make those transformations happen? What were the kind of the challenges and what was that journey like to make that happen? Because I don't believe that enough time is being spent really talking about the people part of the equation when you apply technology to a problem. So that's been a big part of what it is. We'll be going forward with the Clienteling podcast. We're going to be doing some new shows here over the next month or two.
So they just Google your name. Was there a name?
It's the Clienteling podcast. It's called the Clienteling. It's CLIENTELING, the Clienteling podcast. And people can certainly let me know if there are particular topics they'd like us to to bring onto the show or people they want us to interview. But we're finally getting to the point now where it's like, okay, I think it's time to start bringing more and more content out. And it's something I love doing. I mean, I really enjoy doing the podcast. It's just it's just customer work sometimes gets in the way of you being able to think about it, right?
Thank you for sharing that. We'll certainly put a link in the show notes, and there'll be means of getting in touch with you via those links for sure. So, from my point of view, I'd like to say thanks to our audio editor. There's Daniel. We've got Caleb, the deputy editor of the MBN, is going to be helping with some of the other technical stuff on this show. So thank you to them and the MBN network as well. Thank you, Keeman, for co-hosting as always, and last but by no means least, thank you very much, Bryan Amaral, for sharing your story with us. I think it was really compelling.
Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed this, and I've enjoyed I've enjoyed listening to some of your other shows. So it's really an honor to be part of this. So thank you so much.